For years, my spouse has loved walking labyrinths wherever we could find them. David and I traced our way around the labyrinth at Brookside Gardens for the first time in the spring of 2017, just days before our son was set to finish his senior year of high school. We hadn't gone looking for the labyrinth at all. In fact, we'd walked by it many times before without even considering actually stepping inside. But that day we did, for whatever reason, and both of us were struck by the sense of peace and focus that walking the labyrinth gave us. The next day, after a long walk down a wooded path from one neighborhood to another, we were surprised to find ourselves at another labyrinth. This time, Abe was with us, and David and I happily introduced him to the practice of following the curves. Near the end of the summer, our lives were upended. I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer, and after genetic counseling and discussions with doctors about my treatment options, I was scheduled for a double mastectomy. A couple of weeks after surgery, I was ready to start the long path of recovering my mobility and strength. David snapped a picture of me as I made my way along the curves of the labyrinth at Brookside Gardens, and I continued to visit that path regularly during the months of chemotherapy that followed. By the time chemotherapy was in the rear-view mirror and I had just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of my mastectomy, our lives were upended again, this time by David's diagnosis with glioblastoma, terminal brain cancer. As he slowly healed from his craniotomy and tried to regain some of the mobility that he'd lost because of the tumor and the treatment, we found a number of new labyrinths, including a tiny one just a few blocks from our house. We regularly attended the Labyrinth Walk at the National Institutes of Health, where every few weeks a group of volunteers rolled out a large canvas painted with a labyrinthine path. After the recurrence of David's cancer last summer, we made an effort to go to labyrinths again more frequently. Eventually, we fell in love with the labyrinth at the University of Maryland. After seizures meant David could no longer drive, a kind friend drove him there one day, giving me an afternoon at home by myself. Whenever Abe was home this past fall and winter, he would take us there as well. We often brought home a few large and lovely pine cones to display on our fireplace mantel. Just as David had photographed me at the labyrinth after my surgery, I often filmed David during these walks. In early days after his first surgery, he held on to one of the many special walking sticks lent to him by our friends, then soon graduated to unsupported walks just on his own 2 feet. After the more recent surgery, he walked through the labyrinth while using his cane, and then a bit later, still using the cane, but a bit slower and less confidently. Then the next time, by supporting himself with a walker. The path at University of Maryland is fairly accessible, even for people using walkers, with relatively wide paths. When I flip through these photographs and videos, I can watch David's recent decline by how he's traversed the path of the labyrinth, and it's heartbreaking to realize that what has sometimes felt like a long and gradual loss of skills has all happened in just a couple of handfuls of weeks. One day this past winter, a friend wrote on Facebook about her experience making a shrub flavored with pine needles and cranberries, great for cocktails or adding to seltzer. David was excited to try out the recipe, then immediately realized that it would be especially meaningful to acquire some pine needles from the area surrounding the labyrinth. His walking had become so difficult that he could no longer trace the path, but nevertheless, on a cold and windy day, Abe helped his father walk under the pine trees, then reached up to clip some small boughs and store them in the cloth pockets attached to the front of his walker. Then, holding on to David's gait belt, So he could support his weight and keep him balanced, Abe helped his father walk directly to the center of the labyrinth, crossing the paths rather than following them. There, David placed a stone, as was his habit on our many trips to the university's path. We all knew that it would almost certainly be the last time he would be able to be there. A few weeks ago, when Abe came home, he brought David a gift, a beautiful handmade disc, just the right size to hold in one's hands, with the path of a labyrinth carved into the wood. The labyrinth has now come to David, and he traces it not with his feet, but with his moving finger. Thank you for being here. See you soon.